What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Compile Swift podcast, or video, depending on which one you're going to be listening to or watching here. We have another special guest with us today, and I'm really excited about this. We got a whole bunch of exciting topics to talk about. I've got Richard Zarth with me today, and he is a very experienced developer and has built some wonderful tools and some wonderful games. But I'm going to not try and do the introduction here. He can do it much better himself with much better details. Hello, Richard. Thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the kind introduction, Peter. Like you said, my name is Richard Zarth, and I am a developer for mostly Apple platforms. I've been developing since about 2014 on Apple platforms. What really got me interested was the introduction of Swift at WWDC that year. So when I saw that kind of show up at DubDub that year, it kind of got me interested in Apple platforms in a different way. I had, been telling myself for years, it'd be great to dive into, iPhone development and iPad development, but I just never really quite did. And with the introduction of Swift that year, it kind of re-sparked my interest because it kind of seemed like a more or less a fresh slate. So I kind of saw that new language get announced, and then, I had dabbled in programming before that, but not really a lot. But with that, it was kind of a newfound light for me to step in and kind of have a way to get into that development without feeling too far behind, I guess, is a way to put it. So, I kind of, after the keynote, a little bit after the keynote at least, I kind of dove into the Swift book that Apple had put online, and started reading through that, and got really interested right away. So that's what got me into at least Apple platforms. Like I said, I had done a little bit of programming before that, but not a lot, so nothing serious. But that's what kind of sparked my interest in it, and ever since then I've been, really involved in the Apple platforms at least. And since I've backtracked a little bit since then and done some server development as well, and I went back to university after that and learned the basics of C and C++ and Java and all those as well. So and then made a career out of it. I actually was in a whole different career before that, and did a whole career change into software engineering, just based on the announcement of Swift at DubDub in 2014. So It's been a whole life change for me, just with the one programming announcement. So the one announcement of the programming language. And so that's my introduction, at least in a nutshell, with Apple platforms. But I also am a presenter of or a co-organizer and presenter of a kind of a local meetup called Underdog Devs Xcoders here in Orlando, Florida, which is where I'm based. And Underdog Devs, I'm also a mentor there, which is an organization which is not necessarily only based here in Orlando, but it started here in Orlando, Florida. And that's a great organization that helps people who were formerly incarcerated or underprivileged kind of get into the software engineering world, which is a great organization that was started not very long ago, several years ago, and it's been great at kind of providing mentorship access and just kind of informational access, and allowing people to get into this industry, which is great. We could talk about that a little bit more later as well.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah,
I think there's a lot to talk about there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm very excited to talk about that as well. And I can completely relate to the whole Swift announcement and sort of that's the changing in my world, because that's exactly what happened to me. I was a developer on other stuff, and then this thing called Swift got announced, and it clicked in my brain so much more than the technologies beforehand, Objective-C and also the tools that we had back then. I realized it's like, you know what? I can do this. and so, yes, that was for me, was like, okay, mobile is now my thing and has been ever since. So I can totally understand and relate to that.
Oh, I was saying what was strange is that I had an iPhone early on. I had an iPhone starting in 2008. So I didn't get the original iPhone, but ever since the 3G, I had one. And so ever since then I had watched, all the keynotes and whatnot, from Apple, starting with, some of the Macworld stuff. And it was very abnormal for a while for Apple to announce a lot of developer-focused stuff in the keynotes, and some of the videos they had announced, obviously more developer-focused, but not a lot of the keynotes and whatnot that was, somewhat more consumer-focused, even at DubDub. So when they had announced Swift, the keynote itself, it seemed a little extra special, like something I should maybe pay attention to, because having something more developer in that kind of video stream seemed a little strange, right?
Yeah, yeah. What it was, and I had that similar feeling when it was so upfront and right there, and they made it. You know how Apple does with their keynotes, and they make it feel like, okay, this is the big thing we want to tell you about, really. And we got other stuff. That sort of dawned on me right there, and it's funny because even though at that time I wasn't doing mobile development as a career, and then from then on in, even through those early years, it was, well, this is painful, but I still feel this is the thing. And the tools and that, and we're going to dive into some of that when we talk about some of your apps. But yeah, it felt like, no, this is the pain worth going through in those early transition years with any technology, that something special about it. And I feel like with Swift UI, that's another one as well, right? Is there's just something about it that says this is the game changer for those platforms. And it may be painful right now, may not feel right or comfortable, but it will. And ultimately, we all know when Apple does these things, it's a case of, hey, even if it's not comfortable, you're going to have to do it because they're going to make you do it. Right. And so
I definitely remember the early days of Swift with going from Swift 1 to 2 felt like almost a whole new language. I was just talking to a buddy of mine the other day, recalling when Swift 1 used to have C-style for loops. And that seems like a very far distant past now, right? With the modern Swift, C-style for loops seem almost incomprehensible, right? And then Swift 2 to 3 was another, huge amount of breaking changes. And it wasn't until we got into Swift 3 that, it's now a more recognizable language compared to, the modern, Swift 5 that we have now. And, it was rough in the beginning, right? But I think having those breaking changes early on really helped mold the language that we have now. And I kind of, like you said, I kind of feel like Swift UI is kind of on that same path, right? We have some rough changes in some of the early Swift UI APIs, and technically they're all backwards compatible, but I think some big changes, for instance, like the navigation API changes, right? We've seen navigation stack essentially. We've seen navigation view completely deprecated, right, in favor of navigation stack, and that's a pretty big change for a lot of apps, but I think overall, navigation stack is a better way to go. And so I'd rather see that change happen now than 5 or 6 years from now when it's a little bit too hard to make that change.
Yeah, I agree. I recently started using navigation stack in something I'm working on. And it turned out I did it even worse. I did it on a live stream. So I was like messing it up in public, but it's fine. We were having fun with it. But it was the realization of, okay, I'm using it, but I'm actually doing this entirely wrong because I'm basing it on things I already knew, and I need to throw that out the window and start again. But that's fine. I mean, that's, if that's what we have to do, like you say, the early years of Swift, 1, 2, and into 3 was practically time to rewrite the entire app again. But we sort of knew going in, and I feel like I still am happy that Apple did it that way. I would not have wanted to wait another 3 years for version 3 to become the first version, right? It's like, let's rip the Band-Aid off. Let's start getting used to this. You're going in, you accept this is new technology. It's going to change. But at least I'm getting some of the concepts across or understanding in the language. And though the syntax may change, the way we do it may change, but the ideas and the philosophy were there, and I can start adapting my brain to it. Especially as someone at that time, I was more developing using web technologies. So in many ways, going to Swift was easier for me, I think, than say someone who had done a lot of Objective-C, be it desktop or whatever, and then have to adapt what I already knew to the newer stuff, So that's kind of how I went with it.
I also think too, if Apple doesn't get it out there at some point without people using it in the wild, the evolution can't happen regardless, right? Even if Apple waited 3 years and just released, 3 years later, I still think without getting into people's hands and getting feedback and getting things that don't work, we still would have to wait 3 years beyond that before we got to kind of an API that felt a little bit more natural, a little bit more right. So at some point they have to release something. I think the biggest difference is Apple's afraid to put the word beta on things sometimes, right? So when we see kind of the Google alternative of things like Google they'll release something like Jetpack Compose, which is kind of like their version of Swift UI more or less, but they released that in alpha first for quite a while actually, and then they'll release it in beta again for quite a while, and then they'll release version 1.0. And Apple just doesn't do that, right? Apple says, well, here's Swift UI, and it's version 1, and yes, you can ship it in apps, and yes, we promise you this is something that we consider stable. Then developers start to use it in the wild, and they say, is this ready for production, right? And we'll ask that question for 5 years. And so, and that's just the difference in Apple platforms.
Well, and I think with Apple too, compared to say like the approach Google takes, I may be completely wrong on this. This is just my interpretation. With Apple, they know that they have to do these things because they're really more about driving it in for the hardware, right? And the products that they have planned. And that's not to say that Google doesn't have hardware. But I think when it comes down to it, at least the way I see it, Google is about driving the software. That's their thing. Apple is about the hardware, and they have to make software to drive the hardware, right? And that's without getting, we can get into that, there's that whole sideline about, the developer tools and how good are they and everything else. But at the end of the day, that's really, I think, Apple is a hardware company, right? And they have to make software to go on the hardware. Google is a software company who happens to have some hardware. And so I think that Apple's approach has to be, we got to get this out here now because we want to ship next year's whatever device, Yeah. All right. So let's get 100%. Into this here. I want to talk about something that you released recently and caught my eye. And, this is the really simple arcade. And for everybody, we'll put links in the show notes for everything on this. But what I love about this, and part of the reason I was like, oh, I got to get Richard on here, is because maybe it's my age, I don't know. But it's more aimed that it has some of those classic lovable games that we all know and love if you're of, certain age or older, or however you want to put it. Like, for example, I think when I reached out to you, I was like, oh, it's got Simon in there, which I remember as a kid playing with the hardware, and great that I can now have it on the phone. So you want to talk to us, sort of dive into that, why you wanted to make this, put this arcade out there, and some thoughts behind it, challenges.
Yeah. So, I had like I said earlier, I've been part of what was previously called iOS Orlando, which was a small meetup here in Orlando, and it was later renamed to Underdog Devs Xcoders. When we kind of partnered with Underdog Devs as they became a little bit bigger here in Orlando, so I had this small meetup, and I present quite a bit at this meetup. Right now, it's actually the meetup itself is on a little bit of a hiatus, just as me and the other co-organizer are, during this time of year, it's just a little bit slower and whatnot, for the meetup itself. So we're just a little hiatus for a couple months. But as part of this, building presentations is obviously a big part. And so, it's pretty common that when I'm, trying to relay certain topics, these presentations sometimes can actually get pretty involved. And so I did a presentation, several months ago where I was, describing some of the Swift UI layout system. And so as part of this, and describing how different stacks work and how you can update stacks and or update views and, from different views and things like that, I ended up building a tic-tac-toe demo. And so I had this tic-tac-toe demo and whatnot. And so I kind of, presented this. I built out some of the views in real time. And at the end of the day, you had tic-tac-toe and it had some game logic and it whatnot. And so that was built out. It was on my GitHub. And then it kind of, just kind of goes to the graveyard. And then I had a different demo, a couple months after that. And it was about how can you use Swift concurrency in Swift UI? How can you get the two to mold together, right? Swift UI is really backed by Combine under the hood. But with some of the later API changes that were announced at WWDC, Swift concurrency is a little bit easier to use in Swift UI, such as the .task modifier. And so how can you get that to work a little bit better with Swift concurrency? So I did a demo and I got, some things, looking a little better. And so out of that came Simon Says, right? So you get the Simon demo and I do a presentation with that and how do you get that working? The whole thing works off async await and things like that, and get that presentation. I do all that, and then it's on my GitHub, and then it kind of goes to the graveyard, right? It's not in the App Store. It's just kind of sitting on my GitHub, and it's like, well, I kind of put a little bit of extra time into that, right? For instance, like the sounds and the Simon Says game. Those are actually kind of done live with AV Foundation, right? Those aren't sound files. Those are actually rendered live using kind of AV Foundation and using the correct sounds. I even looked up the original Simon game and what notes do they use, to kind of make that harmonic sound, sound a little better. So I do these presentations and they kind of, they live on the GitHub or sometimes they don't even hit GitHub and they end up just kind of, living in the graveyard in my home developer folder. And so, for a weekend, and I was, sitting there, and I want to, how can I get these to do something more than just kind of die in GitHub, right? So I said, well, I could actually kind of put these together probably and put them as a single App Store release instead of just kind of, because Simon by itself is probably not, a great app to release by itself, and tic-tac-toe is certainly not a good enough app to release just by itself, probably. And so one night I was actually, hanging out with my kids, and they came up with a silly app idea, and that was an app idea that eventually became Million to One. And what the app idea was, it kind of started off kind of silly, but they were trying to kind of conceptualize a million, the number a million. How many is that really? And so we were messing around with Swift a little bit, Swift Playgrounds, and they wanted to print out kind of a emoji character. So they printed out a banana, and then 10, and then 100. And again, they said, well, how about a million? And so we did. We printed out a million bananas, and they still don't think really kind of conceptually understood how many that was. And so I said, well, this is a lot, right? It's actually going to take a while even to print this out to the console and Playgrounds. I said, to really understand how much this is, you could hide something in the million and you'd see how hard it is to find that one hidden emoji in the million. So we modified the code a little bit, and they chose an orange because an orange is so not a banana, right? It would really stick out like a sore thumb in a sea of bananas. And so we did that. And then later that night, after they had gone to bed, I kind of turned that idea that was just like living in like a single string in a Playgrounds and turned it into like an actual iOS app where you could scroll through in a collection view a ton of bananas, and in there would be a hidden orange. And so that was kind of a game. And I said, well, if I put this together with Simon and tic-tac-toe, maybe that could be an app idea, right? It would be kind of like a little arcade collection. And my son wanted to add Snake in there as well. So I built out Snake, and Snake uses Combine and Swift UI. It doesn't use like a game engine proper. It just uses Swift UI.
Okay.
And so with those four games together, well, then there's really, really simple arcade, right? And so that's just how it all came to be. It's really just a collection of demos that I said, well, together these can be an app, where individually they're probably just not enough to live on their own. So I said, I'm actually going to release this one early, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. I know I'm going to have bugs. I know it's going to be incomplete, but I'm going to get that 1.0 out there. And so I only took about a week of polishing to get this done. Now, granted, that week of polishing, I had Simon almost completely done and Tic-Tac-Toe almost completely done, right? They were, almost just copy and pasted from my GitHub already. And so I was able to use Swift packages to really speed up the process. The actual app itself, Really Simple Arcade, is only about 3 or 4 different files. There's that, and then everything else is just separate packages. So like Simon is its own Swift package, and Tic-Tac-Toe is its own Swift package. And then Really Simple Arcade is just the application file itself and the app icon and things like that. And it just, everything else goes out to its own package, which was something I wanted to do to ensure that I could add new games by just adding a package and being done with it. And then version 1 shipped, and it had bugs that I knew about. And so because of that, I'm actually using GitHub issues to kind of track those.
Okay.
Because I said, I'm going to ship it, and if it has bugs, that's okay. I'm going to know about them. I'm going to write them down, and I'll come back and fix them. And it seemed like extra overhead to make proper GitHub issues for that, even though it's a private repo. I'm the only one that's ever going to look at it. But I said I'd rather write them down and deal with them later and ship now. And I've since shipped, I think, 3 different updates for the game. But it's kind of helped me, kind of ship early and think of it as a regular kind of like day job app to kind of ship it out and actually get it out there, opposed to, oh, well, once it's perfect, I'll ship it. And then, that's never going to happen. And so it's never going to ship. And that's essentially the whole pitch for Really Simple Arcade.
No, that's great. And, because a few of the things that you mentioned there are sort of some of the things that I say to listeners and viewers, which is, don't wait for that perfect, because it's never going to ship. And I sort of been through this myself. And, sometimes you've got to draw that line in the sand that says, okay, it's not exactly what I want, but then it'll never be exactly what I want, because I'll always want new things. But I know that and I, when I say good enough, I don't mean that to say oh, it's good enough as in it's not bad, but it's okay. But it's truly that thing of, I've lived with something for months now. I know it better than anybody else. And therefore, I've known all the little things, right? And probably most people are never going to notice those. And therefore, it is more than good enough for the majority of folks that they're going to download and play things or use an app. And I think, especially with games, because, with apps, you tend to look at them longer. You're interacting with them more in the sense of you're really paying attention to the details. But if you think of something like with a game, right? Like let's take, Snake, for example, right? There's something always moving on the screen. You're always having to be focused on that thing, and you're interacting with it. So, for example, if the highest score is slightly misaligned, that's fine, because that's not the thing people are looking at most of the time. It's going to bug you as the developer, because it's there, and we all know how we obsess about these things. But when it comes to it's good enough, it is always... I think when we say to ourselves it's good enough, in reality we know it is way more than good enough for the 95% of the users, the players out there. And that interests me, especially about this shipping early, because I think that's important too. For me, there's that extra factor, which is, ship early, find out if you've got something here, or maybe you don't, and you need that tough love from the App Store to tell you, leave it, move on, or rethink it. Does any of that sort of play into those decisions of when you feel it's ready?
Yeah, oh, for sure. And so I've got currently 3 apps on the App Store, and every time that I've actually ended up shipping is when I've had to sit down and tell myself it's time, right? Like, stop doing the tweaks and stop doing this and ship it. And one thing is, I remember back, I've used computers for a long time. I come from, a family where my father's done IT for a living my whole life. So I come from a time where I very clearly remember when, software shipped on CDs and floppies before that. And so I think sometimes I have it in my head where, it's got to be perfect before I ship it. And then I have to really talk myself down from that and say, no, ship it. And guess what? If I want to release an update to tweak this thing, I can do that and ship it. And I know the mass majority of users have auto updates turned on, right? Or if I ship this as an update, a very large portion of users will never even have the opportunity to download version 1.0, right? So, I just have to convince myself saying, no, it's okay. I can fix this, and it's not going to be that, X amount of users got shipped a CD and they'll never get the update. But it really is kind of that, that mentality that you kind of have to snap out of no, it's okay. Like, this can be updated and fixed. And then, like you said, a lot of times those small issues are ones that, the mass majority of users won't even obsess over the same way that you as the developer might. And so sometimes it's better to have it in people's hands than not. And I've had, apps that I've shipped that people, you realize that there are no downloads for, right? So maybe, syncing those extra, hours into, there's no benefit to that, right? Because you weren't going to have any users anyway. I've got an app on the App Store, the Watch App Store right now that, it was a weekend project. I did it in about 2 days. It was a super quick one that solved the problem that I had. I shipped it. It's a counter app, like it, counts up, essentially.
Okay.
And it solved the problem that I had on the watch because I couldn't find a simple, counter app on the watch. Solved a niche problem I had, but it turns out most other people must not have this problem on the watch. Either there's other watch apps out there that they do solve this problem that I couldn't find, or they're just not, using a counter on their watch, and that's fine. Right. It's had very little sales in its lifetime, and that's fine. And so I don't continue sinking time into it, even though there's a lot of features I would add. It's just it doesn't have the sales to justify sinking the time into it, and that's fine. What's nice is I shipped it early on purpose. It was about a 2-day project, and the sales have said, you know what, don't continue sinking time into this because I've got other things I could use that time for.
Sure. And I think as well, that's interesting because that touches on another interesting area that I think it's easy for us to get ourselves in I don't want to say the wrong mindset, but a mindset where we mislead ourselves, right? Because there is, I think there's sometimes I know folks that I talk to and they drop by my live stream, and there's always folks who are like, hey, I want to get into this. How do I start? What do I do this? And then that inevitably leads to the next question, which comes up, which is always slightly funny to me when someone says, well, what app do what apps do you think I should build? And I always say, it's like, well, if I can answer that question for you, I would go build them and put them in the store myself. And so I always give the sort of a more sensible answer, I feel, which is, well, is there an app that you need, right? Not everything you build has to be for someone else. And everything that I've worked on started as something I needed. And then I said, would someone else benefit from this? I think it's wrong when people go into that expectancy, because this comes up as well. They're like, well, I've got how many times have we heard this? I got the idea for the next whatever, next Facebook, next, task app that's going to take over the world. It's like, you probably don't, and therefore, don't go into something saying, I want to get masses of downloads, sales, be super rich and retire from this app. And it's like, if you go in with that mindset, you're going to fail because you're building something for the wrong reason, right? You have to love what you build. And that's why I love when you were saying about the arcade, the fact that it started out as a few presentations that became something, and then something that working on with kids who, you get more excitement from seeing the kids get excited about something. And then working on that. And so it also becomes a family thing. And, it's all of those benefits that to me are far more important than, how much money did I make on the store? How many downloads did I get? Yes, we all want to see downloads, but that shouldn't be the primary driver. because I don't think you'll make an application that you truly are passionate about if you have some statistic that you feel you've got to meet, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, everything is different depending on what your end goal is, right? If you're a business and this is your primary driver, right? Well, then you're going to have different different numbers that you're looking at, right?
Yeah.
Because well, you've got to just sustain the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
For an indie app developer, right? Like kind of the situation you're talking about, it really does have to be something you're really passionate about because otherwise it's going to be really difficult um, to kind of sustain what you're doing otherwise. If you're an indie app developer and that's what you're doing kind of full time, well then you really do have to look at some statistics to really determine what you're going to put the mass majority of your time into, and you might have different metrics that you're going by, based on that. But I don't have any of my apps in the App Store that are there, to really crush the numbers, right? My best,
Yeah.
not selling, but my best downloaded app right now in the App Store. It's a free app, right? There's no in-app purchases. There's no ads. There's no, it's a completely free app. I don't really plan to make it a paid app or anything like that. And that was another, it's a niche app that I had put in there just for my own benefit. I'm a Pokemon fan and I was playing the Pokemon games. I'm like, I have a lot of trouble remembering all the different these two types, are they, good against these two types? And so how do I do that? That gets complicated. And I have a watch app that now I can, tap these two types and it'll tell me is it effective against these two types or this type, and that's an app that I built again in a couple of days and it's, it's been my best, my most downloaded app in the App Store. And so, I think, that's great. And I put time into fixing that app quite a bit, adding new features, mainly just because it hits a market that obviously people like because it gets a good amount of downloads and a good amount of engagement based on the App Store numbers.
Well, and I saw that app in there, and I was fascinated by this. And what fascinated me about it was it's a style of app, but the fact that it is something so very different from all of the other watch apps that we see that usually fall into sort of similar categories. And from what I saw, looking at the screenshots and everything, it looked very usable. So I liked that it was, I felt, unique compared to anything I'd seen before.
Yeah, that spawned out of the idea that I play a lot of the Pokemon games on the on the Switch or on the Game Boys and whatnot. And when you have that console, you don't always want to take out your phone. And I don't play Pokemon Go a lot, but I've got a buddy who does, and he when I was talking about it would be nice to have this more accessible. He was used to play Pokemon Go quite a bit, and the idea of having to switch to an app to do this type check and switch back didn't seem very ergonomic, from a gameplay standpoint. And so that's where kind of the watch idea spawned from. And it'd be nice if you had it on your watch, right?
Yeah.
It's the kind of the idea of having a watch app is that you want kind of short interactions, right? They're just easy to see and easy to interact with, and that's where the idea for a watch app came from, because it is kind of difficult to think about ideas for watch apps early on in the Apple Watch kind of life cycle. A lot of apps were rushing to hit the watch OS kind of app store before it was even its own standalone app store. Like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
iPhone apps were saying, well, we need a watch app, companion app to go with it. And now since then, a lot of those apps have not been maintained anymore, and they've eventually fallen off the watch, and they don't have watch companion apps anymore, because it turned out that a lot of iPhone apps don't actually need watch apps, right? Because it's not always fun to be doing this all the time.
Yeah.
It turns out, right? Again, and Apple has stressed this from the beginning. You want watch apps to be one of two things: glanceable, right? Glanceable information, which are really great for complications, or complications are really great at doing that. Or you want watch apps to be very quick interactions, right? You don't want them to be more than normally a couple seconds, right? You don't want to be staring at your watch for minutes at a time trying to do something. That's just not fun.
Yep.
you normally want that to be seconds at a time. You want your phone to be minutes at a time. And if you want things to be longer than that, well, now you're getting into the realm of Mac apps or maybe tvOS apps. And so that's hard to do, though, right? It seemed like something easy to translate early on. And that was, I think, the fault of a lot of app developers in the beginning, probably more product developers in the beginning, project managers in the beginning. I don't want to just blame developers.
Those who won't be named, right?
Yeah, no, right. But that was actually probably the issue early on is people wanted to just kind of rush to the Watch App Store to kind of hit the gold mine that was like the early iPhone App Store, and it turned out actually that wasn't really the case because it's actually hard to get monetization from the watch. And when I thought of this idea, I thought, well, that would actually be a good glanceable or short interaction. And so it's actually done really well. It's got several thousand downloads, and it's not making me any money, but I just thought it's a cool idea. I use it pretty often when I play the games, and that's why I keep maintaining it. And I've got a long laundry list of ideas that I could do to add more to it and have more things. And then I always fight myself with, well, I could add this, right? I can add a whole list of Pokemon you can choose from instead of doing the types yourself. But do you want to scroll through a list of over 1,000 Pokemon instead of tapping 2 types, right? Like that's probably not what you really want to do. So, I'm always fighting myself with what I want to add versus what I think will actually be, again, that short interaction.
Well, and I think though that it sort of goes full circle, because coming back to the fact that you use it gives you that opportunity sometimes to put in that, oh, I think this is good. Put it in, try it, use it, and then find out, a week, 2 weeks later, how much am I liking using this? No, it was a terrible idea. Okay, great, and I didn't ship it to anyone. Or no, I'm still using this and I think it's going to work. Great, I'm gonna ship it. So that's in there as well. Nice. I was gonna shift here and actually, conveniently, you mentioned SwiftUI, because I was going to ask you. I know that you mentioned to me, we were talking before the show, and that about SwiftUI and other areas like for example, Vapor that mixes in with Swift, and those go right hand. Well, certainly Vapor goes right there with open source, and I know that you mentioned that open source was something that you wanted to get. Maybe I'm using the wrong words here, get into more this year, or maybe focus on a little more. I know from my experiences, I've taken part in the hackathons that things like DigitalOcean and things like that have done before, and those are always a lot of fun. But I always feel like I'm never, that thing of I should do more open source. But then I also have that we'll get there, right? Oh, but am I good enough? Or you see something and you're like, I think I know the answer, but I don't want to embarrass myself by putting it out there. Have you set yourself some goals this year to sort of try and reach, or just sort of say, hey, I want to be more involved and give back to communities on the code side, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So one thing is, I've done some open source stuff in the past, and everything from as small as doing pull request on some existing open source projects to I had some open source involvement in different projects in the past. For instance, there's a Mac editor called Editor, which I think is actually kind of gone by the wayside a little bit for various reasons, but some different things like that. So I've got different involvement to different extents, and I've got some couple open source projects right now that are really small, right? I don't do anything with them except for kind of put them out there, and they've got some single digit stars right now. Which we all know is the really cold hard cache in the GitHub world.
Yeah.
So I've got those out there right now, and I've got a lot of projects right now that a lot of the a lot of the core of them right now could easily be open source, right? A lot of them, they don't have the actual app itself revolving around it. So a lot of it the engine part of it could be taken out and open sourced. I started, probably about 4 or 5 months ago with a lot of my own projects, started really diving more into Swift Package Manager as a way to kind kind of break out my own code bases into more of here's a UI package, and here's a model package, and here's a package for maybe databasing and things like that. So I've been doing that kind of separation with my own kind of projects more recently, based a little bit kind of modeling a much smaller scale, but kind of modeling after some stuff we've been doing at kind of the day job, and it's been working out really well. I really like that. Like I said, that's kind of how I built Really Simple Arcade to an extent, right? So Really Simple Arcade, the app itself is really just the bare bones, app file with the very basic assets. Everything else is broken out. Even the actual UI for the application itself, where you get to the settings menu, where you get you see the actual view with the 4 tiles of the app. Even that is its own Swift package. And then each individual game is its own Swift package. And so I've really been trying to break things out kind of in this way, for a handful of reasons, right? For architectural reasons, for reusability reasons, for things like that. So I would like to take some of the work I've done and start open sourcing some of those things, even if they're just, relatively basic. And I've done this kind of in the past, but not as focused. So I have an open source package that I call RZ extensions. And I have that imported in almost all of my own packages. It's actually the reason I made it open source to begin with, was out of pure laziness, right? I open sourced it so I could import it into all of my own packages without having to worry about GitHub credentials and stuff like that.
That's
if
a good
I open sourced
idea.
it, I could just, yeah, it was a lazy way to import it into all of my own packages or all of my own projects. And then it has all the kind of reusable extensions that I kind of inevitably end up writing for all of my own projects, right? I'm going to end up writing this same method, or I'm going to end up writing this same, extension on this property or something like that. So I said, well, if I just kind of throw this into an open source GitHub repository, well, then I can just, every time I start a new project, I can just go ahead and add this as a dependency through Swift Package Manager, and then boom, I've got access to this instead of having to copy and paste this code or have to add it as a local dependency, which is always a little wonky in Swift Package Manager and things like that. And so it just kind of made it a little easier for me. And if I add something to it, well, then I can just update the dependency on my project, and I've got the new version without having to worry about do I have this extension on this version, or do I have that extension on this project? And I don't have to worry about that. I can just update the repository, and then I'm done. So I started doing that. And I would like to start doing that on some of my a little bit more focused open source work, or stuff that I would like to make open source, a little bit more focused packages, I guess I should say. And, for instance, like a file database manager, I've got that in a couple of my different projects, where it just, it takes a codable objects and writes it to disk and then reads it from disk. And I've got that code in 3 or 4 of my projects at least. And I've updated most recently for Swift concurrency, so now it works with async await, and I've got a version of it that works with combine. And I mean, I could easily take that, package it up, make it, where it works with, closures, async await and combine, and then there's a Swift package, right? It's super small, It doesn't do anything super special. I'm sure other people have that same code written, but it would be nice if it was just an open source package and things like that. So I would like to start doing that kind of stuff a little bit more focused, and then getting more into the open source kind of community and things like that. So that's another one of my kind of like developer New Year's resolutions, right? So release early and open source work, right? So
yeah, no, that's great. Together. And thank you for doing that. I think, I think it's great anytime anybody, takes this approach of, hey, I'm gonna put some stuff out there. It's useful to me, maybe useful to other folks, or you're using somebody else's packages, somebody else's tools, and you find some way that you can help them move forward with it. I think that's great, because I think that's more of what we need, and certainly feels that we're moving more in those directions. As the area for me that always gets a little complicated, but I think I'm getting better at understanding, is things like the licensing for it. For me, it's always kind of one of those, look, if I'm putting it out there, go ahead, use it, do what you want to do with it. I prefer that you don't make $1 million from it and I don't get anything in return. But at the same time, hey, that depending on the license you pick, that's how it goes, right? And if you pick the wrong license, okay, maybe next time think about it a little longer or something like that. At least from my
Yeah.
perspective, as I sort of stumble through these. Any advice for anyone who's never done any open source and wants to get into it? It sounds like maybe, the best approach would be put your stuff out there, see if it helps people, or if other people want to improve it for you and learn from that. But do you have any tips for folks?
Yeah. My suggestion is definitely start small. There's definitely people who want to, do an open source project and make it very large, right? Whether or not that be here's an entire application and now here it is, it's open source. And maybe it's a very loose license, so you could literally take it and then put your own name on it and then release it in the App Store. And then, like you said, oh no, now they're making all this money and I don't get any credit, and that sucks. Or you can have this thing where you make a pretty large library and then you make that open source, and then all of a sudden you have 10 GitHub issues flowing in a day, and you're like, oh no, I didn't sign up for trying to fix all these problems. I'm not your IT support, and I'm sorry that it's breaking in your production app, but that's not my fault because I didn't sign up to be IT support.
Yeah,
And so So my recommendation, starts small. But I think starting off small is the big thing. I have an open source library called Shell Process, and it takes the process API that Apple has, which is a little wonky to use. It allows you to call, the process API allows you to call like console and terminal commands.
yes,
Allows you to call those and then use them on Mac, for instance. It's kind of a wonky library to use, or an API to use, because you have to do things in a very specific way, and then passing arguments to it, it's kind of wonky. And then you have to, it's like a synchronous API, but it could be asynchronous depending on the command that you're calling. And so you have to wait till finish, but you have to do that in a pretty specific way. It's just kind of a wonky API. And so I have it kind of wrapped up in a nice way where you can actually create enums on it, and then pass the names in specifically, and then do things like that. So you can kind of make that API a lot nicer to use. It's very small. It's like a 3-file open source library, and so you can take that and use it to, if you're making a Mac app, for instance, make it a lot nicer to use that terminal command.
I was going to say, I'm totally going to dive into that because I was using Process on a Mac app that was causing me some frustration because of the way it was implemented. So I absolutely am going to look at that library. Thank you.
Realistically, just kind of putting yourself out there. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a great learning experience, either from just developing the open source code itself, right? Again, isolating those dependencies, creating that package, learning the process, taking any feedback that you get, if any, or if you're doing the contribution side of things and you're not creating the package. I think diving into a code base that you might not be super familiar with and doing that, that first, open source contribution is a great way to learn. When I am helping mentor people, a lot of times, that's one of the suggestions I give, especially kind of later in the process of the mentorship, is the question I get: well, how can I boost my resume up? How can I learn this? How can I learn that without creating a whole project myself? Well, find an open source project that's doing this, right? Dive into it a little bit. It's going to be hard, right? Because you're going to have to learn a lot just to kind of understand where to go. But learn a little bit of it. Try to find one of the open issues. A lot of GitHub, a popular tag is like help wanted, or first time issue, or things like that. Easy task. A lot of those kinds of issue tags. Find one of those. Deep dive into it some. Try to find out what the problem is. Especially for mentors who have never had a job in the industry before, which is mentees. A lot of the mentees that haven't had a job in the industry before, which is the majority of them. That's why they're kind of mentee, especially like I said, Underdog Devs. We have a thing we can talk a little bit more about if we have time. A lot of them haven't been in the industry before, and so it's great for them to kind of get that. And that's kind of the same kind of process that you would go through once you get in the industry, right? So the same, dive into a code base, learn a little bit about it. How do I fix this bug, or how do I implement this small issue? Go ahead and implement that issue, or fix that bug. and then go through the whole process of creating a pull request and getting it approved and taking feedback and things like that, right? It's a great process to go through.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree, and you have set this up perfectly for me because I wanted to make sure that we, very conscious of the time, and I wanted to make sure we dive into this. So talk to us, tell me more about the Underdog Devs because this, you and I when we were talking and setting up, to do this recording, this caught my ear and is something that I'm a big advocate for, and I think this sounds fantastic. So let's make sure let's dive into it here and tell the listeners or the viewers, a little bit more about the Underdog Devs and where they can find it and the ideas behind the project.
Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit early on. So Underdog Devs, it is an organization. They've been around for a couple years. I've been a part of it since the start, and they got website's got some more information. It's underdogdevs.org. And so essentially, this organization is primarily focused on helping people who have been formerly incarcerated or people that come from lower economic status and whatnot. Get into software engineering for the first time. And this is web developers, this is iOS developers, Android developers, backend developers. Some of them are coming into Underdog Devs having no idea what that means, right? So coming in saying, I think I want to get into software development. That's what I've got, right? That's step one, right? And so we can help mentor them from there, right? And we kind of find their spot in that. So we have mentors of all of those different genres, all those different backgrounds, and we can help mentees as they come in different ways, right? We have a whole thing called Project Underdog, which is a stipend program where we take people who do know how to do some software development. These are people who are self-taught. And we normally aim for people who, maybe they've been self-taught for about 6 months or so, right? So they've got their feet wet. They kind of know what they're doing a little bit more. So we're not quite taking them from zero to hero, but people who put the time in, but they need a little bit of extra help to finish it off. And so this is called Project Underdog. It's part of Underdog Devs. Like I said, it's a stipend program. We take them, and one of the hardest parts about kind of getting that last bit, those last couple months, is if you are working full time, and it could be hard to really dedicate that last little bit to get really prepped up for interviews, especially in an industry where those interviews aren't necessarily just about raw programming skill, but also about computer science knowledge, perhaps algorithmic and data structure problems that don't necessarily come up in just learning how to do iOS development and learning how to build a React website, right? Like you can learn how to build a React website that's nice and pretty, but can you, the classic reverse a binary tree, right? It's not necessarily the same skill set. And so we take these mentees in with Project Underdog on a cohort basis, and so that happens every about 3 to 4 months. So it's a selection process that you've got to apply for. And we help them out with a stipend program where we essentially pay them to continue learning. We have hourly programming sessions, one-on-one with a mentor that the mentees have to adhere to. So that's about 5 hours a week, right? We do that. We normally try to aim Monday through Friday, 1 hour a day, and the other 35 hours a week they can continue learning at a great pace. We have a lot of resources that we provide. Udemy courses, all that kind of stuff, and so the goal is for the last 40 hours a week for the last several months they can really focus on honing their skill and get ready for interview prep. Some of the big companies and small companies and all that. And so outside of Project Underdog, we've just got mentors that still sometimes do pair programming, and we've got study sessions, and we've got again tons of resources and things like that to really help people get into the world of software engineering, again, whether that be web development or server development, iOS development, Android, all sorts of different things. And this was all started by a great individual. His name is Rick Walter, and he's amazing. I've known him for several years now. He's actually an iOS developer. That's how I got to know him. And and Project Underdog was really helped to be spearheaded uh, by someone named Jessica, and she's also really great. So um, just a really good set of people. We could probably have a whole episode just talking about just Underdog Devs. So because there's a lot to go through. So
This is fantastic. I mean, this is, this touches very closely with some of the work that I do, and this is great because what I always love to hear that there's projects out there that are focused on helping people get into these things when they have no clue how to start, or they're looking at it going, I don't think I can do this, and I think, as I always say, and I think most of us always say, is no, anyone can do this. It may seem daunting from the outside, and so to also, take groups of folks that have some situations the rest of us have not had to deal with, and to have that on top, and then want to, makes this challenge that much harder. So, I think it sounds like a fantastic project, and I love this idea of the mentoring and getting them used to really things that they will encounter should they choose to do this as a career, right? I think, as we all say, or at least everybody I know says, when it comes to programming, making applications, these are very binary things, right? I believe anyone can do it. I think that it's just a question of how you go about doing it, but ultimately they are attainable goals. But that path for everybody can be very different. And so to have a mentor that can help you go down your own personal path, I think makes it a lot easier to get to that end goal and keeps you motivated to keep doing that. This sounds like a fantastic project for getting involved with that. And I would very much love to dive more into this because, I anything that helps anyone, achieve whatever their goal may be. In this case, we're talking about programming and things like that. It's fantastic. And also, it sounds like by doing this interaction, they learn all of those, what we call the soft skills, right? So you're going to know how to work with people if you join a team, if you get into a company, things like that. And then, that sort of rounds out the skill set for them, and then helping them get in, that direction as well. So, this sounds like a fantastic project.
Yeah, the project is great, and we do everything we can to help these people. Everything from mock interviews to resume building. It really is one of those things that I think a lot of people can take for granted. Like you said, even some of the soft skills. If people go through, kind of a more typical path into software engineering, go through university and things like that. A lot of these things are just kind of, they're just kind of included, right? Well, you go through maybe a whole, resume building, course at university perhaps, and you have peers that can help you, do X, Y, and Z, and you do all this stuff, and there's a lot of people that don't have that, and it can be very intimidating, and it can be very easy to, kind of like you alluded to, it can be very easy to get up or give up once you kind of hit, one too many brick walls, right? There's only so much that Stack Overflow can give you, and so it really is a great community, and we're in the fourth cohort now for Project Underdog.
Okay.
So I'm with my fourth mentee now, going through that program. But it's been great to see all the previous mentees. I'm not saying that it's not been great to see my current mentee as well. He's doing fantastic. But it sounded bad how I phrased it originally. But it's been great though to see my previous three mentees, go through the program, get better and better with every week as I meet with them. Go through the interviews that they go through, get their jobs, and then eventually get into the careers. I still try to check in with them at least, once every month or two, and they all seem to be doing great. And so it's just genuinely great to see them succeed in that way. because I don't know to what extent they would have had the same opportunity without Project Underdog and without Underdog Devs, right?
Yeah.
There's a chance that they could have done just as well, and there's an equal chance, I think, that they wouldn't have been able to attain the goal that they were trying to do. And so I think it's a great thing to see. So, and I hope that we can continue doing the cohorts and Project Underdog and just keep the Underdog Dev community in general alive. And one of the things that we really focus on at Project Underdog with our new mentees is, focus on your core learning, whether or not that be iOS engineering or Android or web, like focus on your platform learning kind of on your own, and focus on your kind of more data structures and algorithms. You have to do that on your own some too, but really focus on that with your mentors, because that one-on-one programming session, that's really valuable time where you can really kind of solidify and make that more concrete. That way you get the best of both, right? You don't really neglect either one.
All right, Richard, thank you so much for joining me. We have barely scratched the surface of topics and open conversation. So thank you so much for joining me today and talking about all of these topics. I'm sure the listeners and viewers are going to appreciate it. Certainly the responses I always get is that they love it when folks come on and share their experiences. Please, we'll put it in with everything in the show notes, but please tell everybody where they can find you and where they can find your apps, and definitely you need to go play Snake and Simon in the store, because that's two classics from my childhood. So please, thank you. Richard, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate it, Peter. Thank you so much again. I don't really do a lot of social media, but if you do want to, find me online, I do have my own website. It's nothing great to look at, but it's just my initials. So it's rlzii.com. So you can kind of go there, and then you can find my GitHub from there, and then you can find links to my different apps there as well. But if you wanted to search straight in the App Store, the app that we were talking about earlier, again, it's called Really Simple Arcade. And then from there, you can normally find my other apps kind of straight from there as well. That's it. And then Underdog Devs, again, that's underdogdevs.org. That's where you can connect there. And if you're interested in becoming a mentor, you can find the links there to kind of, hook up with the Slack channel and whatnot that we have. Or if you want to be a mentee there as well, you can kind of go through in the application process to get hooked up with the Slack channel. Most of what we do is directly through Slack. That's really, I don't have a lot of other links or anything to promote. I don't do Twitter or anything like that. So everything I have is straight through there.
Well, again, thank you so much. And folks, we will put links to everything in the show notes. I strongly urge all of you, whether you want to be a mentor or a mentee, go check out the Underdog. That is just such a great project. I love that idea. So thank you so much. So to the listeners and the viewers, I hope this has been helpful. I found it thoroughly interesting. We could probably go on for hours here, but we got to stop at some point, right? So thank you, everybody. You can find me and everything else at compileswift.com, or just compile Swift on your network of choice. That's it. With that, we will catch up with listeners and viewers in the next episode. Hoping that I can do more of these, because like I say, we find some great folks like Richard. That is it. Thank you.